Hello, BBYO. My name is Jess Daninhirsch. I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I'm on the IC Press Corps team this year. And I am here with Angela Buchdahl, who is the senior rabbi at the Central Synagogue in New York City. And I'm going to ask her a couple questions today. So my first question is, what led you to the rabbinate, and what made you want to become a rabbi?
I think that there are many things that made me want to be a rabbi. It started with having a great rabbi in this small community where I grew up in Tacoma, Washington, who really welcomed my family when we arrived from Korea with open arms. And I think that along the way, I had really strong mentors when I got to college and my summer in Israel. But probably if I had to point to one thing, it was probably that summer in Israel when I was 16 years old, where I did Jewish learning that got me so excited about thinking in a different way and made me feel connected to something so much bigger than myself. And I thought to myself, there's a job where I get to do this all the time. What's better than that? And from that point on, I really didn't actually seriously consider doing anything but being a rabbi.
That's really interesting. I can definitely vouch for Israel being a life-changing experience.
Totally.
So my next question is, how do you feel that your education at Yale and HUC prepared you for a future as a religious leader?
So I was a religious studies major in college, and I think that helped me prepare with a foundation both of understanding religions besides Judaism, but also really learning how to think critically and how to also build relationships with people across lots of lines of difference. It was a very diverse kind of student body, and I really tried to meet people from lots of different ways of, different faiths, different ways of thinking, different places in the world. So that really prepared me in a certain way to be a world citizen, which is important. And of course, HUC taught me, everything from Hebrew and Talmud to how to do a funeral. So I think that was, of course, very important, and it also helped me build a group of rabbinic colleagues who have been the people who helped me along the way, because you don't stop learning how to be a rabbi when you graduate from HUC. You actually just feel like you're just starting to learn how to be a rabbi. And then when you get in the field and you start just doing the work, in the beginning, people start calling you rabbi, and you're like looking over your shoulder, like thinking, who are they talking to? And you realize they're talking to you, and you rely on your colleagues to help you navigate the things that you can't be possibly prepared for, because the world keeps throwing new stuff at us. So I enjoyed both of my experiences. They were different, and they both prepared me for eventually becoming a rabbi.
That's really interesting. Have you ever experienced any prejudice from either the Asian community or the Jewish community because of your ethnic background? And if so, how did you deal with it?
I was born in South Korea, where it's one of the more ethnically homogenous countries in the world. It's called the Hermit Kingdom for a reason. It's really and there's a long history since there were Americans who came to Korea, and that biracial children who were usually born of like an American and a Korean woman, American man and a Korean woman, there was a lot of prejudice and discrimination against biracial children. In fact, there was even a policy early on, quietly the government would send them abroad to be adopted, because they really wanted to keep Korea more pure than that. So there's a lot there about the prejudice that I think I would have faced if I'd stayed in Korea for much longer than about age 5, which is when we left. And I think in many ways my parents left because they didn't think I'd be fully accepted, my sister and I, if we stayed in Korea. When we got to the United States, in some ways, I was in a very multiracial school, and it was not an issue that I was necessarily Asian. But then this school that was actually a magnet school for desegregation had it was more than 50% black. It was like lots of people of color. So then the kind of the really truly white space that I inhabited as a kid was the Jewish community, ironically. And there, I wouldn't say I faced discrimination, certainly not from my home synagogue. There, I was loved, I was held, I was known. My family had been in that synagogue for 3 generations, so I had a lot of family, literally, but also like the kind of adopted synagogue aunties and uncles and everybody else and grandmas. And so I felt very embraced. I think I faced more prejudice, implicit bias questions when I went into the wider Jewish world, which included going to Jewish camp for the first time, even BBYO. BBYO was a very different place then. When I remember going to a convention, I felt like I was the only Jew of color. It's possible that I wasn't, but I certainly remember it that way. Now I look out and I see a very different BBYO, and it's not just about, the kind of diverse cultural makeup, but it's diverse in so many other ways as well, and it's very accepting and very inclusive in so many ways. And that being said, I think that anytime I got to know people in a community, then it stopped being a question. Then I just became Angela, and I just became a Jew, and I just was Korean, and I could just be myself, and it was less about all the labels. Anytime you get past that stuff, people just get to know you as a person. And so the good news is, even if that might be kind of the initial response I got in places, it was never where I was once I started to know people. And the level of acceptance in the Jewish community is obviously why I could stay in it and become a rabbi and now lead, one of the largest congregations in the country. That to me is still like a miracle. The idea of a girl born in South Korea who grew up in the tiniest Jewish community in Tacoma, now leading a huge congregation in Manhattan, that was definitely beyond my wildest imagining.
I can only imagine. Do you have any advice maybe for kids who are experiencing, the tensions between maybe choosing between two groups of identities?
When I was growing up, I always kind of felt like I was the only one with my sister, navigating this Asian face and this, Jewish identity that was also Asian, and I felt very alone in that. I think one of the things that I've learned is that people are very complicated and complex in beautiful ways, and almost everyone you meet, if you actually get to know them, they're also navigating multiple identities. Not all of them are as obvious on their face as mine is, but you might be someone who is Black and Jewish also, or you might be a feminist, but you're also Orthodox, or you might be gay and you're struggling with your identity, with your Jewish identity as well, or you might be from the South and you feel like you're carrying a different cultural identity, or from some other place in the world. So the fact is that people are often navigating lots of different identities, and that's actually part of what makes us so rich. And sometimes those identities help us define what each of those parts mean. And I think one of the things I would just advise is that we don't have to subsume one identity to feel like we're really part of the other. Like in some way, maybe what it means to be one, when we say Shema Yisrael, that we are one, is that we can find a way to kind of make all of that feel whole inside ourselves. Maybe that's part of what it means to be a Jew.
I like So recently, you were contacted by the hostage taker at the synagogue in Colleyville, Texas. How did you feel in that moment when you were speaking with them, and how did you handle it, and how did you feel afterwards?
It was really hard to believe that it was real when it was happening. Like, even as I understood this is actually happening, and it was not in the news yet, so it wasn't something that when I made the phone call, because I actually received a phone call first with a message basically telling me to call back, I realized pretty quickly that it was real, and I would say that it was terrifying. I was literally physically shaking. I felt this sense of tremendous responsibility. This person essentially told me that it was my responsibility to do this thing he was asking me to do, and that there were 4 people's lives on the line. And I felt completely responsible and at the same time powerless. There was obviously, I was not going to be able to do what he asked me to do. He was asking me to do something that nobody can do or should do. I was all day. I was completely occupied with thinking about their safety. I got a second call in which the gunman told me that I was running out of time and he was running out of patience. And I really, from that moment on, thought, I think he's going to kill these people, and I can't do anything about it. So it was of the longest day of my life, and it included a lot of scary conversations with FBI and police, and I can't express the sense of relief and gratitude I felt when they escaped. Also, complete admiration for this rabbi and the other 3 hostages, who not only showed such courage and bravery, but also such generosity of spirit, not only with each other, which they did, because they really were so generous about how they treated each other, but even of the gunmen in a way, and that I found astonishing and amazing. My experience afterward was, of course, a little bit of now, is there a target on my back, on my synagogue's back? I mean, I think every Jew felt a little bit more vulnerable and a little bit more exposed after that. I think I felt that in a particularly profound way just because I got the call. But I think that we're all struggling with what it means to not want to hide, not to be cowed by anti-Semitism, not wanting to be afraid to be publicly a Jew. So I kind of am doubling down on that, because that's the way I want to live in the world, and that's who we need to be. But I would say that I'm still thinking about, what the message is and how we respond to what I think is kind of growing and scary anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it's definitely a scary world, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like the young people today, we really so many people just want to make their voices heard, especially when it comes to anti-Semitism and, just general safety of, fellow human beings. So do you have this is my last question, do you have any advice for, people who just want to make their voices heard, either in the Jewish community or outside of it?
I think it's really important to make our voices heard, but I think it's important not to just do it on the mountaintop, kind of saying, anti-Semitism is bad. Obviously, we need to say and stand up to it, but I think we partially also need to make our voices heard sitting across tables with people who don't know who we are yet, who don't understand, and actually really building those bridges. So it's not so much just sort of, the kind of anti-Semitism. It's not just fighting back. I think it's also needs to be actually a reaching out, a bridge building, and building those relationships. I think one of the things I realize is that when you get to a crisis moment like I had when we had the gunman, there's nothing I can do in that moment, really. It's too late. And when we get to a crisis moment, looking at, what Whoopi Goldberg said, which, 2 weeks later, or it's not even a crisis moment, it just felt frustrating, or the Amnesty International report about Israel. When you get to a moment like that, there's a lot of sense of people really being very upset. There's not a lot that you can do in that moment. The work that we have to do is the kind of slow planting of seeds and work that happens behind the scenes a lot of times, that often you don't see the fruits of what your labors are right away, that less sexy, less out there, but it's those relationships and the hard work on the ground so that we don't get to those moments later. And I can't say we can stop all those things, but I do think that that's some of the work that we have to really, really work on. But I have to say, being here makes me feel more hope than I have felt in a very long time. I think if there is anything that makes me know that we are going to be okay, it really is seeing the boldness, the courage, the voice of this convention and our BBYO Jewish youth. It really makes me feel very proud that I was part of it and that I could be witness to it tonight, and to know that you're going to be our representatives in the Jewish world.
It's amazing.
It is. You guys are amazing. Thank you.
It was such a pleasure talking with you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
We're so glad you're here.
Thank you.